Protests in China usually end in two ways. They are either nipped in the bud or crushed with violence. But right now, the country is somewhere in the middle. Hundreds of protesters have hit the streets across the country. You have to see these pictures to believe them. Protesters are chanting slogans like Xi Jinping step down and Communist Party step down. The last time something like this happened was in 1989 during the Tiananmen Square protests. And as we all know, that ended very badly. The Communist Party deployed tanks to drive out students who were protesting. Question is, what exactly has triggered the demonstrations this time? In one word, COVID-19. You see, China is the only major economy still following a zero-COVID policy. They're using lockdowns and quarantines to crush COVID-19 cases. But there is a downside to that policy. Lockdowns mean economic hardships for people. It also means restrictions on businesses and movement. So people began to protest against this policy. There are demonstrations in Beijing, in Shanghai, in Wuhan, in Nanjing and Urumqi as well. A lot more cities are reporting protests, but with China's crackdown on the media, it's very hard right now to verify facts. While the overall trigger is the zero-COVID policy, the immediate reason for this outburst is what happened in Urumqi. This happened last week. 10 people died in a building fire in the city. According to some reports, it was a needless tragedy. The residents were stopped from escaping the burning building because of the lockdown. Makes you wonder how bad is the outbreak in China, right? Well, the government has reported more than 40,000 cases on Monday. To give you some context there, the previous peak was just 28,000 in April. In fact, China has only reported a total of 3 lakh cases until now, meaning Monday's toll is almost 12% of the total. The fact is, these numbers are unprecedented in China. Even though the virus was first reported in the country, their COVID numbers were always under control, or at least that's what the government had claimed. Even today, China's official COVID death toll is just 5,200, much lower than other major countries. Now, just to be clear, other countries have also witnessed anti-lockdown protests. The difference is, this is China. This is a country where dissent is punished with force. So for these people to turn up on the streets and protest is a massive statement against Xi Jinping. He secured a third term as president in October, and 2 months later, this is what is happening. Many protesters have found innovative ways of expressing their dissent, like holding up blank sheets of paper. No matter how this episode plays out, one thing is certain. This is the biggest challenge to Xi Jinping's rule since he became president. But will it be enough to depose him from power? That is a question. Highly unlikely, though. Let me go straight across to our guests who are joining us this evening for a very quick chat. We have Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain, who is joining us on the broadcast, and we have Inar Tanjain, who's a senior fellow at the Institute and chairperson of Asian Narratives. He's joining us from Beijing. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. General Hasnain, your first comments on what is going on in China. Many reports are saying that this is the biggest protest the country is seeing since 1989. What's your view on it?
In 1989, I also followed what happened, and it all ended up in Tiananmen Square. This time, 30 years later, the same thing is repeated in a different context. China has moved on since then. It's networked with the rest of the world. Many Chinese students, scholars, etc. have studied in the West. They've all tasted democracy. They've tasted freedom. And this is not just about COVID. This is a lot to do with democracy. It's a lot to do with freedom. People today are demanding freedom around the world. COVID and what you're seeing happening on the streets of various cities in China is just a manifestation of a symbolism of what the inner desire of the Chinese people is. No doubt Xi Jinping may be able to succeed in subjugating all this, but the signs of this were present well before the 20th Congress, almost 2 to 3 months before, when rumors were emanating of a potential coup, Xi Jinping possibly under pressure at that particular time. But he overcame all that in the typical Chinese tradition, Chinese way, and everything was forgotten. But the comeback, the fourth round of COVID, has obviously triggered something. What is happening is symbolically the Chinese people are looking at the rest of the world, the manner in which India has handled it, for example. It's very successfully. The way the West has handled it and how it has opened itself out. And I think classically one of the greatest symbolisms today is the World Cup, which is taking place in Qatar. People are watching the World Cup, people are seeing unmasked people enjoying themselves, sitting in the audience, players hugging each other, etc. Why can't the same thing be done in China? This is what people are asking. And they've got a history of Hong Kong. They've had a history before that of Tiananmen Square. Obviously, people are picking up the courage to be able to protest. Where this will end is very early to say at the moment, Shreya. I won't even hazard a guess. But knowing the Chinese tradition, knowing the manner in which Xi Jinping, his ambitions for 2035 and beyond, I think he will use every means to stay on.
Inar Tanjan, is that what is happening? I mean, when was the last time you saw pictures like this come out of China? I understand the zero COVID policy. I understand the need to keep citizens safe in your country. But citizens are coming out and saying enough is enough. We are not okay with this. How do you think what we are seeing on the streets of Beijing and other parts of China, how do you think this will end?
Well, as you pointed out, it's a few hundred people in a number of cities. This is a nation of 1.4 billion. Obviously, there's tremendous amounts of frustration by people, and I agree with my colleagues' remark that people in China seeing the World Cup, they're starting to question, but they don't read the science, and obviously neither does my colleague. This is not about policies, and India did not handle it successfully, and neither did the United States. The United States lost 3 years of longevity. And since 2019, the average expectancy of life went from 79 to 76. In China, it remained at 77. It's now 1 year ahead. China has been successful, but they have to adjust their policies now. And the reason is saying zero COVID is one thing, but we know that we're going to have to live with COVID for a long period of time. At this juncture, the plan is to get 60% of the people vaccinated or boosted within the previous 6 months. That will allow them to open up as long as they have treatment options like Paxlovid, which can help those who have acute reactions to COVID-19. If they do that, they can open up. But in the meantime, they have a lot of housekeeping to do. In the past, it was the national government setting, this kind of zero COVID policy, but they were allowing local housing units to actually make decisions about what was appropriate. So in one housing unit, maybe there's 10 people who were tested positive. They were allowed to stay in their homes, and the whole community was not shut down. And others, 10,000 people, one person has it, and they shut the whole thing down. Now the government has issued a series of reports where they say this has to change, and they were in the process of changing. The reason that you see so many cases of COVID is they were relaxing, people coming in from outside, people moving around China, and as a result, they have this upswing. But just keep in mind that right now in Japan, they have 60,000 cases a day.
I'm sorry to interrupt you here. What kind of housekeeping is this that you have 10 people who die in a fire and help cannot reach them because of lockdown measures? What sort of housekeeping is this? This is not housekeeping, this is murder, which is why people are out on the streets protesting.
Well, now you can, if you want to have a hostile narrative and repeat it, that's fine. If you want me to talk, I can tell you that.
I'm asking you a question. I'm asking you a question respectfully, sir.
You said it was murder. You said it was murder, and you're trying to characterize it that. Generally, as a host, you're supposed to be somewhat neutral, but obviously not. In any event, the spark that ignited this was a false picture that was sent around saying that the doors to this unit this housing unit had been wired shut, and that was not true. Even the Western press said that that was a fake piece of news, but it set off. It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. There's a tremendous amount of frustration. And as I said, people seeing the World Cup, They feel very strongly that they want to have the same things, but they don't consider the practical realities, the science. And that's where the adults have to come in. In terms of housekeeping, yes, that's the whole point, is that that housing unit in Urumqi was the one who was putting up these barricades, which did interfere with the fire department getting closer to the building. So, yeah, there has to be some changes. They've already said in Beijing, the Beijing government has said you're not allowed to put up barricades to prevent people from in and out. There has to be emergency services and things like that. Whereas previously they had allowed these communities. They have very large communities in Beijing. A square block could have 10,000 residents easily. Okay. And in that case, what they have, they're taking those decisions away from the local people, trying to put it at a more responsible level.
Okay, so this is interesting. General Hasnain, you said this is not just about COVID. Mr. Tanjian here, who's representing Beijing's point of view, is saying this is just about COVID. This is about the housekeeping. This is about the curbs. They are fed up with it. Don't read too much into it. Don't read anything beyond what you're seeing right now.
See, Shreya, it's very easy to believe that. I mean, one can say it. I have great respect for Mr. Ainad, no doubt his perception and point of view. But the rest of the world is also watching, and we've got our observations. We have seen other countries also, overcome the problems of COVID. They've been done in a more, should I say, conducive way, more compromising way, with freedoms allowed, etc. In India, we had a lockdown in India. We have all experienced this in India too, and many countries in Europe and America have also experienced the same. But it didn't have that kind of an effect on society. You see, a society which is already not facing and enjoying the freedoms otherwise, of course, they're doing very well economically, no doubt, but not enjoying the freedoms of existence otherwise, is now suddenly subjected to further subjugation virtually through all these protocols of COVID. Obviously, we'll feel frustrated, and this is 3 years down now, almost. So I would say that China should accept that there is something more to it. It's not just the COVID policy. It is already an existing, perhaps a virus of wanting freedom, democracy, which compulsively comes to any nation, where the people are so evolved, getting evolved today, economically get so free. China has been able to lift 750 million people out of poverty. What a great achievement. But if you've achieved that, at the end of it, besides poverty, people also desire freedom and democracy. That should be acceptable to the Chinese leadership, and they should compromise on this. Thinking of another Tiananmen is something which China should think many times again.
Okay, Mr. Tanjian, before we wrap this discussion, look at some of the slogans we have heard come out of China. Xi Jinping, step down. CCP, step down. What do you make of these? What do you read into it?
These are the frustrations of a few people. There's a minor component of the crowds, the few hundred that would show up in these events. Only a few of them were shouting this. The issue is that this is not a cry for democracy. If you look at independent groups, most Chinese people are very, very wary of democracy. They lost a lot of faith in free markets after the debacle in 2008 and 2009 with the financial meltdown. And they see what's happening in the United States and other places. They're not really impressed with what's going on in India or the UK or any place where they have democracy. They don't think that you can solve long-term problems by putting governments in for a few years and expecting them to create miracles. Now, India has had continuous leadership, but it's still very difficult to find the solutions to move the country forward. And for many Chinese, they see this as one of the weaknesses of democracy. Do they think everything is perfect in China? No, but for the first couple of years of COVID-19, since 2019, the Chinese believed in their government. They had 95% plus, and this was, Harvard and Pew and all these independent surveys said that the Chinese people really thought their government was doing a good thing for them. So at this juncture, The Chinese government has work to do. They need to get in place progress, and we'll see how they do.
We'll leave it there. Enar Tanjen, thank you very much for joining us. General Hasnain, thank you very much for joining us on this broadcast. This was a quick chat, so thank you for it. Now, the scenes in China are indeed worrying, but on a lighter note, it seems like politicians in India have some advice for President Xi Jinping. JDU spokesperson Sunil Singh is saying, why bother with zero COVID? Use the Bihar model to strike a balance between life and livelihood, he says. Listen in.
China is still adopting the zero COVID policy is not correct. Even one case, they do a lockdown. Then, like the model of Nitish government, they should also adopt that they should have strike a balance between life and livelihood. Life is important, but livelihood is also important. So there has to be some relaxation in the lockdown so that people can earn their livelihood also. And the COVID, whatever the world has followed, the Chinese also followed zero COVID policy and being so strict lockdown, as if even the people say that fire brigade cannot move around in this strict COVID policy is not required. The world has seen through it.